Putin invading Armenia. A new war may be incoming. Armenia is exploding with outrage ahead of new confrontation. Meanwhile, Iran is in flames. Zelenskyy supports protests and Trump is preparing to send troops. Russia is losing a powerful ally. Putin snapped and started shouting. Tehran cracks, Moscow bleeds. If you don't want peace, we'll force you. Putin is being dragged to the negotiation table by force. Trump snaps and promises to make this year unbearable for Russia. New sanctions are smashing the occupiers' economy. Moscow is under pressure from all sides. What happens next? Let's talk about it. Hello, this is Ukraine Today. Maria Farafonova here with the latest updates. Russia is threatening yet another country. Moscow is now openly floating the idea of a new special military operation, this time in Armenia. Armenia's foreign ministry has summoned the Russian ambassador and delivered a formal note of protest, following remarks by Kremlin propagandist Vladimir Solovyov. Recently, Solovyov said on the air of his show that Russia should focus on problems in its near abroad rather than on situations in Syria or Venezuela.
For us, what is happening in Armenia is far more painful than what is happening in Venezuela. The loss of Armenia is a giant problem. To hell with international law, with the international order. If it was necessary for us, for our national security, to start a special military operation in Ukraine, then why, based on the same considerations, can we not start a special military operation in other points of our zone of influence?
After these statements, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Armenia summoned Russia's ambassador Sergei Kapyrkin and handed him a note of protest.
It was emphasized that this is an unacceptable encroachment on the sovereignty of the Republic of Armenia, a hostile manifestation, and a gross violation of the fundamental principles of friendly relations between Armenia and Russia.
Back in 2024, Armenia banned the broadcast of the author program Sunday Evening with Vladimir Solovyov and Evening with Vladimir Solovyov, and not without reason, judging by the host's statements. Meanwhile, protests are raging in Iran. Volodymyr Zelenskyy has fully supported the protesters. The president of Ukraine published a post in Persian on the social network X, in which he backed the mass protests in Iran and called them a genuine uprising capable of weakening Russia's position in the war against Ukraine due to a possible halt in assistance from Tehran. In his post, Zelenskyy noted that the events in Iran are a clear signal that things will not be easy for Russia, and that the people of Iran deserve to be freed from a regime which, in his words, had brought much evil not only to Iranians but also to Ukraine and other countries. He also urged the international community not to miss the moment and to join in supporting change.
It is important that the world does not miss this moment when change is possible. And every leader, every country, international organizations must now join in and help people get rid of those who are guilty of the fact that Iran, unfortunately, has become what it is. Everything could have been different.
Zelenskyy's post has received more than 30,000 likes and thousands of shares, mostly from Iranian users who express solidarity with Ukraine and thank him for support in the struggle against dictatorships. Trump is preparing to send US troops into Iran, a move that could radically reshape the balance of power in the Middle East. What does this mean for Putin, and how will the Kremlin respond to direct American military intervention in Tehran, Russia's key regional partner and one of its main weapon suppliers? All the details next.
Iran is in flames. The protesters are not giving up, but tyranny is not so easily overthrown. For now, official Tehran is doing everything it can to suppress the uprising. But there is no talk of compromise or negotiations with the demonstrators. As dictatorships tend to do, they deal with problems through repression. And state media cover the mass protests in Iran as terrorist attacks. Officially, the Iranian authorities have not reported the number of those killed or detained, and human rights organizations provide differing figures. According to some sources, the number exceeds 500 dead, including military personnel and police officers. Law enforcement agencies, approximately 10,000 people have been arrested. An Iranian human rights organization has confirmed the killing of at least 192 protesters. At the same time, BBC journalists were told by medical staff from 2 hospitals that in just 2 days, more than 100 bodies were brought to them. Bodies. There is also information about several thousand people killed. No one can provide exact numbers, in particular because the internet has been shut down in Iran.
When the internet was cut off, which happened on Thursday evening, it became clear that the authorities were getting very nervous. Before that, for a while, they tried to maintain a not very harsh pace of suppression. Of course, this is not very harsh by the standards of the Islamic Republic, Nevertheless, the number of victims indicated that there were somewhat fewer than during previous protests. But as soon as the internet was cut off, of course, there arose the possibility that escalation would occur.
The United States has promised to come to the aid of the protesters. Trump publicly warned Iran that the United States would intervene if the Ayatollah's regime resorted to deadly violence against protesters. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham even publicly called on the American president to eliminate the country's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. According to him, the current Iranian regime is the main source of instability in the Middle East, and the continued rule of the Ayatollah, in his opinion, only worsens the crisis in the region.
He is the Hitler of our time. He is a religious Nazi. He is a terrible person. It's time for him to go. The people want him to leave.
But Trump is in no hurry, not only to listen to Graham, but also to carry out his threats. Western media report that the American president is currently only considering a number of options for military intervention in the situation. In Iran, this is in response to the brutal suppression of protests. A direct military strike, as well as alternative methods of pressure, cyber operations, and new sanctions are being considered. A response to threats from Trump. Iran has stated that if Washington attacks Tehran, they will strike Israel and all American bases in the region.
Trump, as I see it, would intervene in the situation in Iran by military means. But only in one case would he be absolutely certain of success. He definitely does not need a drawn-out war with an uncertain outcome. He is actually running under the banner of a peacemaker, ending wars, and if he does start them, it's like what happened in Venezuela. They captured Maduro in 3 hours, flew out, and that was the end of it. And he would only go for it in one case, knowing for sure that it would end for him in a clear and obvious victory. What he means by a clear and obvious victory, we don't know. It's quite possible that it could be the abandonment of the nuclear program, for example, or the abandonment of both the nuclear program and the ballistic missile program. That's also a possible option. And
what about Iran's main ally, Russia? A likely change of power in Tehran is not at all in the Kremlin's interest. However, just as with Syria and Assad, Putin is most likely not planning to officially send military support. The same can't be said about the Ayatollah's gold. Since the start of the mass protests, Russian military transport planes have begun making frequent flights to Tehran. The media does not rule out that the export of gold to Russia has already begun, along with his closest aides. Yet this remains Plan B. The regime aims to crush the revolt, and although analysts say the Iranian dictatorship is at its weakest, the overthrow of the regime is still in question.
If the rebels don't get weapons and then some kind of organization to actually use those weapons, the authorities will simply crush the uprising. Once again, judging by what's happening, they've followed the path of 2019 and cut off communications. Next comes a bloody crackdown using any weapons, including possibly artillery. After all, why not? No one is going to say anything anyway. Notice that the international community isn't reacting at all, not even stirring. No one at the UN is saying a word. Europe is silent, as if they've got water in their mouths. People can't keep walking into gunfire and fighting with security forces who are shooting at them with automatic weapons or rifles forever unless they get some kind of help, unless these people themselves get weapons.
Most likely, everything will be decided in the coming weeks, if not days. It is possible to overthrow the Ayatollah's regime and, as a result, deprive Russia of one of its key allies. But the Iranians need support.
If he doesn't want to, we'll force him. Donald Trump is preparing to make life much harder for the Kremlin dictator if Putin continues to resist peace talks with Kyiv. And as the global press reports, the United States could very well make 2026 far more difficult for Russia than 2025 ever was. The arguments in our report.
We are approaching the final stage. This is exactly how Vladimir Zelenskyy describes the state of the peace process today. In an interview with Bloomberg, the president of Ukraine stated that he does not object to Europe starting negotiations with Russia.
I am not against Europe negotiating with Russia, especially now when the US is putting on pressure and Europe has started talking about security guarantees.
Now it's Moscow's turn. According to the head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, Russia will have to prove that it is truly interested in peace. In Kyiv, its allies have already agreed on a 20-point peace plan. And most importantly, there is a report on the specified security guarantees, which will come into effect immediately after the ceasefire. This is not about declarations, but about clearly defined and reliable security mechanisms backed by Europe and the United States. The foundation of these guarantees will be the armed forces of Ukraine, a capable army with real combat experience. The task of the European partners is to provide it with the necessary weapons and resources. The second element of the security system will be the so-called coalition of the willing. It includes 35 countries, most EU nations, as well as Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, and Turkey. And of course, the United States. Washington will be involved in monitoring and verifying compliance with the agreement, as well as in creating a safety net mechanism in case of attempts to disrupt the peace process.
The EU is working on plans to ensure Ukraine's economic prosperity. After the ceasefire, these ideas will be set out in an upcoming document on prosperity. The document will outline measures for the short term and for the next decade to stimulate Ukraine's economy and support its recovery.
And it seems that Putin's gang has less and less room to maneuver.
The Russian Federation, by starting the war, has not achieved its goals as it had expected. And considering that besides Ukraine, the goal is also to destroy the unity of Europe and the West. In general, in a certain sense, territorial conquest as well, because to believe that Putin, for example, does not want to bring the Baltic states back under Russian control is naive. You would have to be very naive to think that, especially when they keep insisting that there are no such plans.
But so far, the mighty Russian army has run into a powerful Ukrainian feast. As the Wall Street Journal reports, over the entire past year, the occupiers captured less than 1% of Ukrainian territory. At this rate, it will take Russia at least another year just to reach the administrative border of the Donetsk region. The very one that Putin is demanding from Ukraine as a precondition for peace. But what turned out to be even more painful for the Kremlin was not the front itself, but events far beyond its borders. The lightning-fast capture of Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro and his wife by American forces became a vivid demonstration of what an effective military operation actually looks like.
The brilliant success of the Americans demonstrated in Venezuela showed what a real special military operation should look like. This demoralizes Russian citizens even more, both ordinary people and the elite. The fact that Maduro was one of the Kremlin's most important allies only made the situation worse.
Other striking episodes further reinforced this picture. In particular, the seizure by the US of an oil tanker that was being escorted by the Russian Navy. At the same time, the cost of the war for the Kremlin continues to rise rapidly. Russia's military spending in 2025 is estimated to have reached 15.5 trillion rubles. That's 5 times more than before the full-scale invasion. And that's not even counting the costs of maintaining the occupied territories and payments to the military. At the same time, oil and gas revenues in November fell by 34% compared to the previous year. And to cover the record budget deficit, the authorities raised VAT from 20 to 22% starting January 1st.
Total percentage points.
All of this directly affects ordinary Russians. The cost of living is rising and investment is being stifled by high interest rates. Public opinion is changing faster than propaganda can keep up. If at the end of 2024, 37% of respondents supported continuing the war, by 2025 that number had dropped to just 25%. Meanwhile, according to the Levada Center, the number of those who want peace talks to begin has grown to 67%.
Going forward, we will continue to see a continued slowdown of economic growth and economic dynamics in the Russian Federation. And the year 2026 has every, so to speak, prerequisite to become a year of either depression, that is when the economy neither grows nor declines, which is a very bad state. Frankly, it's much better when there is some kind of certainty, or even if we, so to speak, are just observers of certain crises.
Dissatisfaction is also building up among the elites. Frozen assets in European banks, the inability to manage billions, and the lack of any visible prospect of ending the war are undermining the loyalty of the Kremlin's inner circle.
The year 2025 is the turning point for the Russian Federation in the direction we've all been waiting for. In 2026, the first half of the year, there is a high probability that the country will at least enter a depression. And
although the Russian dictator is still able to suppress protests within the country, the Wall Street Journal emphasizes that he will not be able to continue this war without the support of the elites. And if the United States increases its military aid to Ukraine, especially in terms of protection against missiles and drones, the pressure on the Kremlin could rise sharply. And then it will be war fatigue rather than the desire for victory that may push Putin to negotiations. But by then it will no longer be on terms that Ukraine can accept.
Trump shifts to an all-out offensive against Putin. The US president has approved a set of punishing sanctions that could deal a heavy blow to Russia's economy, backing legislation introduced by Senator Lindsey Graham. What comes next? We'll break it down in a moment.
While Moscow continues to pretend it's ready for negotiations, Washington is moving from words to instruments of pressure. US President Donald Trump has given the green light to a bipartisan bill to strengthen sanctions against Russia. The decision was announced by Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, one of the authors of the document. According to him, the bill had been in preparation for several months and has now received the political approval of the White House.
This is a very timely decision, because Ukraine is making concessions for the sake of peace, while Putin only talks, continuing to kill innocent people.
The key idea of the bill is to strike not only at Russia itself, but also at those who continue to finance its war, terrorizing and killing civilians every day. The document grants the US president the authority to punish countries that buy cheap Russian oil, thereby fueling Putin's war machine. First and foremost, China, India, and Brazil could fall under these sanctions. The bill opens up direct levers of pressure on these countries, from financial restrictions to trade sanctions, in order to force them to reconsider their cooperation with Moscow in the energy sector.
The US is still making attempts in one way or another to win over the Russian Federation. This plan is not being put on hold because it is part of the US confrontation with China. Another part of the issue is that it isn't working, but the US has not admitted that they will abandon these attempts. These attempts may be more friendly or less friendly.
But instead of stopping, the Kremlin is looking for a loophole to bargain. According to Greiter, the Russian dictator hopes to persuade the American president to trade Venezuela for Ukraine. The Kremlin raised this issue back during Trump's first presidential term.
I don't subscribe to this version. I don't adhere to this version, because the first term and the second term are very different in this context. Back then it was, let's make a trade so that Putin doesn't attack. But now Putin has attacked, and attacked in such a way that he actually doesn't know how to get out of it. And before this, it was a very powerful state. In Trump's mind, I mean, invincible, nuclear, with a large army, a big economy, vast territory, everything just the way Trump likes it. Everything is big. But all that bigness ran up against Ukraine, which, from Trump's perspective, is rather small. And it forced everything in the world to change.
That's why today, dividing the world the way Putin and Trump wanted to during Trump's first term as president is no longer possible.
The US is now confronting a kind of global alternative system that operates bypassing the US, bypassing their sanctions, and is almost entirely tied to Chinese industry. And almost all Venezuelan oil, Iranian oil, and to a significant extent Russian oil as well. These are resources for Chinese oil refining. And so, with this global empire, so to speak, which is scattered across different jurisdictions, which, as we recently saw in the incident with the ship, is capable of changing flags, where countries, so to speak, back each other up. This global empire remains, and it will continue to exist. Let's put it this way. It's not something the US can simply ignore, because in principle, this global empire, with certain efforts and certain capabilities, will increasingly roll back the role of the US on the international stage.
Today, Ukraine has proven that even against a superpower, it is capable of dictating the rules. And now it is Kyiv and its allies who are determining what the terms of peace will be. And the tighter the West turns the screws, the faster Eritrea will decide to make concessions or lose the last remnants of its influence on the world stage.
That's all for now. Stay with us to be the first to know what's happening right now. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. See you soon.